Hey everyone, it's good to be back with you all again. After covering the original Zone of the Enders for the PlayStation 2, I knew it was only a matter of time before I'd be delving into its sequel, Zone of the Enders: The Second Runner. So, I figured sooner would be better than later, as I had many fond memories of playing this one when I was younger, and I just couldn't wait to get back into it once again. Back when it first came out, I had immediately declared it to be one of my favorite games of all time. Big shoes to fill, right? I think so. Well, let's not waste any more time, and see just how well Zone of the Enders: The Second Runner for the PlayStation 2 holds up today.
Since the dawn of history, human beings have realized various forms of energy. Civilizations have progressed with them. So where does such energy like Metatron lead our civilization?
Released in February of 2003 for the PlayStation 2, Zone of the Enders: The Second Runner, known in Japan as Anubis Zone of the Enders, is the direct sequel to 2001's Zone of the Enders. The game is set 2 years after the events of the first, with a new, unfortunately named protagonist.
MR-1422, Dingo Egret, unlocked.
Dingo, who's currently working on a Jupiter moon named Callisto as a miner, discovers Jehuti, the very same orbital frame from the first game, while under attack by Barum forces. With no idea how Jehuti ended up there, Dingo, I hate saying that, pilots the frame and begins to fight back against Barum. Multiple characters from the original make their return here, as do plenty of new ones to make this all feel like one heck of a continuation. On top of everyone's favorite computer, Ada, we also get to see an older and far less annoying Leo Stenbock, as well as the game's main antagonist, Nomen, and his orbital frame Anubis.
Give that orbital frame back!
New characters include Ken Marinaris, a woman who appears to be an enemy at first, but later saves Dingo's life by binding him with Jehuti for life support. Heck, we even see Elena make her return as the game approaches its latter half. And I'm not sure if you'll count this or not, as the actual person does not make a return here, but the AI of Viola and its sheer determination to destroy Jehuti are all very much alive, as we quickly begin to see. The segments with her mech, the Nephthys, are downright scary, with regular attack methods having no effect, requiring you and Ada to think fast. Instead of keeping the character models in CG like the first game did, the second runner decided to give them all full-on anime appearances. I actually found this style to work much better than the originals, as the characters were all designed in an anime-like fashion to begin with, so this only allows the characters to display even more emotions. Right from the first mission, you can begin to appreciate the game's presentation. Before Dingo first discovers Jehuti, you're piloting a slow and smaller mech for no other purpose than to give you an idea of just how blazing fast the orbital frame is by comparison. I loved this approach, as it made you feel like Goku throwing off his weighted training clothes for the first time, just to get ready for a big fight. The gameplay also boasts some major enhancements that I would have loved to see in the original. For starters, you can now lock onto multiple targets with your particle shots all at once. This allows you to take down waves of enemies in a few seconds if they're weak enough. Fans of the Panzer Dragoon games might also find this a bit familiar. Even without this feature, Jehuti still has the ability to fight multiple enemies at once instead of just one at a time, like you were forced to do in the original. I also enjoyed being able to hit enemies up or down by pressing triangle or X, respectively, at the end of a combo string. There are also segments where you're able to fight alongside NPCs, that's non-playable characters, or protect them from an enemy onslaught. Perhaps the biggest contrast in all of this is the game's main character. Despite his ridiculous name, Dingo proves to be a much-needed change of pace as a former soldier. This spared us another round of "I don't want to fight" tirades from Leo once again, and helps the game's plot move along at a much smoother pace. Speaking of pacing, this game really went out of its way to address complaints people had with the previous entry. There was almost no backtracking to speak of this time, with each stage holding its own unique scenarios to get through, to combat any repetition, far more interesting boss fights, more enemy types to keep you on your toes, and a greater set of sub-weapons that you'll acquire throughout the story. The game still has 2 SOS missions like in the previous game, but they are much more manageable and frankly exciting this time around. The second of these comes along at a major point in the game's story. You're assigned with protecting a large number of troops against Barum's oncoming forces. In order to succeed here, You have to fight all of them while simultaneously moving to heal your troops with a geyser sub-weapon, so Leo can come in and repair them. This is easily one of the most large-scale epic battles I've ever seen in a single-player game, and I'm even more shocked that I first witnessed something of this nature on a PS2 of all consoles. This game was truly a technical marvel for its time.
Beautiful. Incredible.
There was no point in the entire game where I found myself getting bored or groaning about any of the objectives I had to complete. Every single stage had you doing something completely different from the last. One minute you're racing to the end of a speeding train. The next you're fighting a boss with an ability to put you in literal darkness with nothing but a lock-on function to guide you through it. There's a huge amount of small details that also helped enhance the story experience. The fact that Dingo also knew Viola previously was a nice revelation that helped increase the tension of the boss fights with her AI. It was also neat to see Leo pilot a Vic Viper, the very same Vic Viper from the Gradius series in fact. The little bonus game they added as a nod to Gradius itself was also a nice touch. And the story revelations were also quite interesting, especially as we went on to discover Noman's true intentions about completing Project Auman, the fortress capable of destroying entire solar systems.
So where does such energy like Metatron lead our civilization? Destruction! Destruction to end all! The universe and human subconscious are willing their own end!
Yes, here, Noman is trying to claim that activating this destructive fortress is the will of Metatron, one of the game's major forms of energy, itself. The game wants us to believe this is simply the ranting of a madman, but I wonder. The game's final battle, or battles depending on how you look at it, were nothing short of spectacular, after such a long but rewarding build-up throughout these two main games. After discovering that Jehuti and Anubis were basically two sides of the same coin, it only made this epic matchup to be all the more fitting. I was honestly just surprised to get a sequel that actually answered most of the questions we had following the first game. The attention paid to this game's script and plot did not go unnoticed. While I don't personally believe the following negatives to be too large of a deal, I will still mention what they are so people can form their own opinions. Just like the original, the game's length is once again quite short. While I did find it to be a little longer than the original, it can still likely be completed within 8 hours tops. In fact, less than 6 for most. Unlike the original, however, there was not nearly as much backtracking, if any, which allowed for a continuous string of new content all the way up to the finale. When it comes to length, I'm much more concerned personally with how much I enjoyed the experience than how much time I necessarily spent with it. If the experience was longer but less fulfilling, then I consider that to be a step down from shorter, but more enjoyable. The next issue revolves around the game's dialogue, at least in the English translation. It's odd.
We need that weapon.
The military fortress?
The military fortress. Auman. Auman.
I'm not sure who worked on the game's translations, but they are admittedly a mixed bag here. This also leads to some very odd moments in the voice acting as well.
Since I found Jehuti, you'll have to give it to me.
What does Bara want with Callisto?
Oh? You don't look like a mining man to me.
Get lost!
Still, the dialogue itself is overall competent, and will guide you through the story just fine. There's a few issues from the original that still made their way into this title, like difficulty fighting in the smaller corridors, though this was at least heavily decreased since the first game, and the game's lock-on camera not always behaving the way you want it to, particularly during really fast battles and even some boss fights. Slowdown does occur in this title sometimes, as it did with the original, but this only tends to happen when there are huge amounts of enemies on screen at once, and it never causes any major gameplay issues during the few moments when it does. Some will argue that the other features added onto the game, like the additional versus mode, survival mode, boss mode, etc., were all tacked on and don't really contribute much to the overall experience. I'd say that this is true, but I never really went into the game with any of these features in mind in the first place, so it personally never bothered me. What we have here is a sequel that addressed almost every single issue players had with the first title, and made everything better, with improved gameplay mechanics, larger sub-weapon and enemy variety, a much more gripping and thought-provoking story, and a largely enjoyable cast of characters. It's pretty much the perfect sequel, and still stands tall as one of my favorite gaming experiences of all time. And hey, they've still got the best particle effects in the business.
Dingo!
There's not much more I can really add here. A game that I first went into with some moderate hopes, ended up blowing all of my expectations away, and even setting the bar for mech games going forward. It's the Gundam game that I always wanted, but never really had. And I'll never stop singing its praises. So that's gonna do it for this video. As always, thank you all for watching, and let me know your thoughts on this game in the comments below. And I will see you all again, real soon.